I watched the pilot episode of The Amazing Digital Circus, and I want to talk about it. I do want to make something abundantly clear, though. Only the first episode is out. Therefore, this really isn't a formal critique. These are my first impressions. Additionally, I will always be extra charitable towards the first episodes and chapters of stories. There's a lot of work an introduction needs to accomplish, and the more wildly creative something is, the more work will pile on. Therefore, I handle my thoughts differently, because I mainly judge if the opening episode or chapter told me what it needed to while still being entertaining. Now, full disclosure, I didn't really want to like it. I have this stubborn tendency to not like things I know nothing about creeping into my YouTube recommendations, especially if it seems to be an overstimulation of senses aiming at popularity through stimulation. But I've wanted something to critique, and I had half an hour to burn, so I watched. And despite my best efforts, I liked it. So let's start. Efficiency in writing is based on how much information can be conveyed in a given amount of time. However, it is imperative that a work of fiction does not feel rushed. The ideal pacing for every story is different, but there should always be enough time for the story to convey what it needs to without dragging. The Amazing Digital Circus has exceptionally high pacing, but it mostly avoids the dreaded rush. In fact, the pacing is combined with the audiovisual experience in a very particular way. Bright colors, fast cuts, humor that includes recognizable sound effects from memes. We're in the zoomer zone. Yet it's actually easy to follow along. The chaos is an intentional effect, so it allows the viewer to be confused in the first few minutes while it establishes the rules very quietly. The premise of the show is not one that can be gently stepped into, so it throws the audience into the show at the same moment as the protagonist, Pomni. Her reactions are comedic, but overall quite reasonable to the situation, so her questions and observations mesh well with the audience's. The show wastes no time establishing the type of humor it will use, establishing the characters, and even power skills Cain with ease. That's all done before the 5-minute mark. Then 2 different kinds of external conflicts are introduced. The audience is fully prepped for whatever the show can possibly throw at it. That's all done by the 12-minute mark, which is around the halfway point. Thus, the rest of the episode can just be a story to explore the world. Speaking of which... There's a lot going on in this world, yet the threads are all recognizable. This world is a polished conglomeration of the media that spreads like wildfire on today's internet. Liminal spaces such as the backrooms, mysterious technology like the SCP Foundation, and a background darkness that implies an ARG-esque way of interpretation. All of that presented with chaotic humor, and you're looking at a work of fiction engineered for the YouTube viewer of today. I don't think I can discuss the world without theorizing quite yet. With only one episode to work with, we don't really know anything about the world, but we have evidence to make predictions. I haven't watched anyone else's video essays on this episode, so the following are my musings after watching it a couple of times. I wouldn't usually do this, but I think a show that invites fan theories can be evaluated based on the experience a viewer will have investigating. First, I don't trust Cain. Sure, it could just be a name, but this frame shows CNA and we know Cain is in charge, so A probably stands for Abel. If there was an Abel who is now missing, then it probably follows the biblical story. The story goes that Cain killed Abel out of jealousy, which may come as a surprise if you're mainly familiar with these names from the SCP Foundation, which reversed their roles for some reason. Considering that Cain is happily in charge, there is a chance he wouldn't have liked there being someone equal to him in power. Second, the headset Pomni put on to enter the world seems very invasive. In trying to take it off, she pulls not only at her eyes but her mouth, so it seems to be some kind of full-face apparatus. She also describes it as weird, so whoever is running the tech is not mainstream in that world and is likely up to something nefarious. Again, Cain is in charge, so he's probably connected in some way. Also, a computer with a headset is shown with some heavy emphasis twice in the episode. There's not enough information to make anything of it quite yet, other than the first appearance in the exit door not backrooms is proof that Cain knows what the actual one looks like. Third, I think there is a way out. It would be a very odd narrative decision to say that there is no exit in the first episode and have it be true. Plus, the character who abstracted had apparently been talking about an exit door. I highly doubt it's the one Cain created with the totally not backrooms inside. maybe Kaufmo was silenced. Evidence includes that the discussion of how everyone has to let go of the idea of leaving takes place in a hallway that shows the rooms of unknown characters who are almost certainly the ones who also abstracted and are in the cellar. Remember, in writing, you can always assume intentionality. For a show that appears to want to play around in plain sight, I think this conversation happening in that hallway is one such instance. Besides, even if the exit door was the fake one Kane made, the fact Kane has kept developing the door in secret makes him even more suspicious. Anyway, I'll leave the actual theorizing to the theorists. I only brought those points up because, together, they present evidence that the world of the Amazing Digital Circus has some merit in its design. It's caught my attention and I want to see it explored. The world has room to provide different directions for the story to go, which is an important element in creating intrigue. The characters might eventually escape, or maybe they learn to love Big Brother. I think this will be the most controversial part of my first impressions. I think the characters could use some work. Now, the characters aren't bad at all, but there's a key factor missing in them that I would be remiss not to bring up. But first, I have to contextualize what I'll bring up. I watched the pilot episode a few times, and while I did enjoy it, there was something bugging me in the back of my mind about it. Yet I just couldn't put my finger on it. I finally realized what it was when I was compiling my notes for this very video and I was jotting down what I thought about the characters. In character development, the most important thing a character needs to have if they are going to have a role more important than standing in the background is something called an internal conflict. The way it works is that every character needs, at minimum, two factors that directly contradict each other. I'll lay it out in the simple format of, this character is X, but also Y. For example, you could say, Detective Joe has a passion for justice, but years of stressful work has driven him to struggle with alcohol abuse. Or, Bob is a successful tech entrepreneur and provides a comfortable life for a family he loves, but he's finding himself in more and more gambling debt. Now, it doesn't have to be that extreme, and it can be even more extreme. What matters is that the character will ultimately struggle to make important decisions because their internal conflict will pull them in two different directions. Detective Joe has to stake out a suspect at night, but he's across the street from a bar and has to fight the temptation. Bob lies about his income to his family as he struggles to patch up his draining accounts, while also finding himself gambling it all away again. Regardless of the situation, you want your protagonist to be given choices that the other characters won't necessarily understand to be important, but both the audience and the character involved know that they could lose everything if they choose unwisely. The internal conflict is so critical to character development that it must be established as soon as possible. You don't necessarily have to spell it out right away, but the audience should notice the inherent irrationality that internal conflicts cause to their bearers as soon as the opportunity arises. The Amazing Digital Circus seems to either not have internal conflicts fully fleshed out, or the odd writing decision was made not to introduce the characters with the conflicts in use. Pomni is thrown into the circus and she wants to leave. She interacts with the other characters a little bit, but she does try to escape through what she hoped was a real exit. She does try to help Ragatha once, but there are no real indications for who she was before being trapped other than she seems quite average. She's an everyman, but there seems to be no incongruity in her nature to add anything to her decision making. Jax is a benevolent jerk, except to Gangle, with whom he actually acts mean-spirited, but without a motive to explain why. The audience is left to do the rationalizing behind his behavior on their own. For example, he's somewhat reminiscent of Jeff Winger in Community, so the stuff about Jeff's behavior would influence what a Community viewer might expect of Jack's backstory. Kinger seems to have somewhat of an internal conflict in that he seems to have some amount of wisdom mixed with his anxiety and delayed cognition. Gangle, ironically, features the two genres of comedy and tragedy with her mask, but after breaking her comedy mask, is stuck with the main trait of being tragic for most of the episode. Ragatha is probably the character that displays some of an internal conflict in the way I'd expect one to appear in a pilot episode. She's friendly and even forgiving, but also seems to be dejected at the end. Maybe she actually is disappointed that Pomni didn't really try to help her at all, or maybe she feels bad Pomni's first day went awry. Plus, her optimism is clearly a coping mechanism to keep herself from thinking about the situation she finds herself trapped in. Regardless of cause, the intrigue has placed her as the character I currently feel the most invested in. Kane might have an internal conflict, but considering that he has nearly full control over the circus, there is no real way to determine whether or not he has ulterior motives, which would be the main internal conflict I can think of. He's either a threat or the one protecting them from a threat, but that's not revealed yet. I originally forgot to write about Zooble. Other than the sarcasm, I don't think we know anything about them, so I can't say if there's an internal conflict or not. My point in saying all of that is to illustrate that the series can absolutely fix this in future episodes. Let's workshop Jax for a moment to prove it. I can think of two main, broad reasons he could be revealed to act the way he does. Situation 1, Jax could have been someone who was friendly and considerate before he was trapped. His internal conflict was that he was doing it thinking he'd be recognized or praised for his good deeds, that all the sacrifice would be met with reward. Then, after being trapped in the circus, his view of why kindness matters was shattered, and he's become a jerk out of spite. Situation 2. Jax could have been the one most devoted to finding a way out for whatever reason. It could even work as an extension of Situation 1. But, as it became clear over time that there was no escape, he's essentially given up hope in his behavior and his own coping mechanism to disassociate with the world around him. Such ideas are simply suggestions I came up with to demonstrate that the characters could absolutely have internal conflicts be revealed over time to the audience, but that it was kind of odd to see so little of it in the pilot. We see glimpses in Jax possibly using the bowling ball to put Kinger and Gangle in the hole to protect them, or he was just being a jerk. We see Ragatha's fragile state. The question is whether or not the show will fully utilize an entire group of characters in a world with so much going on. The Amazing Digital Circus will either be great or a mess. Only time will tell, but from this pilot episode, I'm optimistic. Yes, it has the visuals and the jokes to be entertaining, but underneath the surface, the show also displays a lot of potential in the world it takes place in for a very interesting plot. The general absence of internal conflicts thus far is somewhat concerning, but it would be so easy to fix in future episodes. Overall, I think this will be a good watch, and until next time, have a good one.